in a session earlier, and this is fun. I'm enjoying this. So thank you so much, Carrie, for all your hard work. Besides myself, we're going to hear today from Garrick Howell, who is the ACDA president-elect and is currently with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And Roger Szemraj.
Carole,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I am looking at the screen and I'm not seeing this play in the Whova app. So hang on a minute. I apologize for interruptions.
Oh.
I don't know what's going on. I have hit broadcast. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
Don't know what's going on there. And maybe it's my program. Can anyone text me and tell me if they are not seeing the session? Oh, hang on, it's loading. I so apologize.
I'm
all right.
Just glad you're the one who screwed up and I didn't.
Right? Okay, I see the slide. Continue on. So apologetic for that.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I just finished introducing or explaining that I'm joined today by two ACDA colleagues, Garrick Howell. Oh, Garrick, I am so sorry. I did not correct this slide. He's with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, not Education. And Roger Szemraj is ACDA's legal counsel. Now, keep in mind that at the end of our session, Carrie is going to help us facilitate a Q&A. And I understand that there's a chat feature that you can enter your questions or your comments, and we're going to review those here at the end. This is our agenda today. Today, what we'd like to do is briefly talk about what is ACDA, give an overview of the organization. We'll then turn it over to Garrick, who will review basics of entitlement. Then I will speak just shortly regarding the menu, how everything starts with the menu, some basic processing information. And finally, and maybe most importantly, our guest speaker, Roger, will give us a legislative update. So let's go ahead and get started. ACDA is the premier association for USDA foods and domestic agriculture. The association represents multiple interests in USDA foods education and advocacy. I love the mission, strengthening the impact of domestic USDA foods programs, and our vision, working together to nourish the nation. What are USDA foods? Simply put, it's foods purchased by USDA from American farmers, dairymen, ranchers, fishermen, and manufacturers. And there are two main goals of the program: to support American nutrition assistance programs with food, and to support American agriculture. We have a broad coalition, and that includes agriculture and industry, and then government. ACDA membership has a collective voice for policy decisions impacting food distribution programs. We strengthen, identify, monitor, and address issues that impact our programs. And finally, community. Our mission is to educate and empower our communities by providing resources for school food authorities, cooperatives, food banks, pantries, soup kitchens, and other community agencies. In looking at our membership categories, this is one unique aspect of ACDA. We support various stakeholders. This is the one place where various partners support one another to further the use of domestic agriculture. This graphic identifies 4 pillars of success to identify the association's goals and directions for the future that align with the new mission and the vision statements. The first one is strength. Second, education. In this pillar, we serve as the definitive resource for domestic USDA foods programs through a variety of educational opportunities. Then collaboration, and fourth, guidance. We're the respected resource and voice of the domestic USDA food supply chain in guiding public policy development. Having shared that brief overview of ACDA as an organization, now I'd like to turn it over to Garrick, who is going to give us some information regarding entitlement. Garrick.
Thanks, Carole. Thank you to everyone for having me with you today. I'm glad to be here and privileged to be able to present some information specifically on entitlement, and we'll get into some basics on entitlement as outlined in federal regulation. Nothing we want to get too far in the weeds about, just some background on how funds are allocated for USDA foods. Meal reimbursements specifically aren't our focus today, but we will talk about them in context of how they relate to what we're going to call the donated food assistance here in just a moment. The federal regulation dictates that states be provided adequate funding for meals served to the extent funds are available. What does that really mean? So what that really breaks down into are two different categories of funding. One is the cash assistance or the meal reimbursement, as we just mentioned, not what we'll focus on today, but it is a part of it is a component in the funding formulas. Second to that, on the slide here, is donated food assistance or USDA foods. It's an allowance per meal to purchase USDA foods, and it must account for 12% minimum of National School Lunch Program federal funding. And when I say a minimum of 12% of that federal funding, and we tend to call that a 12% adjustment, and it is a little bit misleading when we say that, because it sounds like it's just a simple application of 12% more entitlement, and that's not the case. The 12% requirement is met along with a 1.5 cent per meal allowance in meal rate as provided by USDA, and they do that via WebSCM for us as states. As we'll see, these numbers are projected for the duration of the school year, and all entitlement is projected for the duration of the school year. We don't actually know what the meal counts are going to be until that year is closed out. So we do have to do adjustments after the fact, but we do operate on a projection effectively through the entire USDA foods and school year. They're the same on the calendar. So if we can move to the next slide here, and I'll advance my notes. F&S is charged with oversight of the program. They use the program monitoring and integrity branch to achieve this primarily. They work with states, to work with processors, and all kinds of stakeholders in the process to make sure that things are done properly and things are done according to USDA regulations set forth. The SDAs, however, are charged with the effective and efficient administration of program operations. And we, as state agencies, work with F&S, not just the program monitoring integrity branch, but other branches such as CN operations and food distribution. The CNOBs, child nutrition's operations. That's it. That's operations branch for organizing and ordering state requests for deliveries. Now, when it comes to entitlement, every state administers things a little differently. Some will have similarities. There are 50 states plus territories. There are not necessarily 50 ways to apply entitlement formulas to apply entitlement dollars, but there are a lot of different ways. So we'll speak, number one, I'll speak specifically on how we do it in Kentucky. And number two, I did speak with Jackie in Texas to get more insight on how they do those calculations in Texas. So we can get a little more specific. Entitlement funding, it funds the funding sources are laid forth by federal fiscal year, October 1st through September 30th. That's one calendar in which we operate on within the program. And then we also operate on program entitlement years. So for the school year, which mirrors what a school year is, at least in Kentucky, July 1 through June 30. I don't think that's unique at all to our state. But for NSLP and CACFP, and summer food service runs along with that federal fiscal year funding template. here we'll go into the basic formula that's used for entitlement. This is the formula that USDA uses to determine how many dollars a state is going to be offered in a program year. They take our most recent complete prior year meals. So generally speaking, that would be the last completed school year. So in a normal situation, we would be looking at the meal counts from school year 2020. And they multiply. Now, we're not in a normal year. Things are different. There are some waivers, and Roger will talk to some of these things a little more. But specifically, in Kentucky, we applied for and were given permission to use the entitlement or the meal count waivers for entitlement calculation. So we are operating on school year 2019 meal counts currently. But again, it's a bit of an anomaly. I'd say anomaly, but I'm not trying to downplay, but you guys understand what I'm saying. It's a little different. That's multiplied by the projected meal rate, which includes that 12% funding adjustment. And they do their best, again, to project that. And it's a lot like the weather. They are, in fact, trying to predict the future in many ways. So you got to understand that there are going to be adjustments and changes made throughout the year. That's something that states, that school districts, that stakeholders, even USDA, they can't control that those adjustments have to be made. It's not something that somebody just chooses that needs to be done. The mathematics, the arithmetic, the funding sources, all of those numbers have to line up, and they have to speak to one another and agree, or else this doesn't work overall. So adjustments are required. So the most recent complete prior year meals times the projected meal rate, which includes that 12% adjustment, not 12% overall, but adjustment to make sure that our federal funding for the entire program is reflected in our entitlement projection and meets that 12% minimum requirement. The last thing that is done in the formula is they add or subtract our prior year's school year's balance, program year balance, whatever your vocabulary is. Those are the same date periods for us. And then that gives us the total entitlement projection. Now, that 12% mandate last year, well, in prior years, we've had bonus offerings that have met that requirement, and there have been years that we haven't. So that can vary from year to year. And in specific cases of certain states that need, for example, I think New York requires a kosher meals meal rate adjustment. So those kind of things are factored in here as well. Meal contribution of USDA foods. The plan assistance level is what we call the PAL, and that may be something you're familiar hearing. The PAL, and that's typically something that school food authorities or local RAs tend to utilize. That vocabulary at the state level, we tend to call it entitlement dollars or entitlement. In Kentucky specifically, those two terms are actually, in Kentucky, planned assistance level is rarely used as a vocabulary term. Entitlement is used interchangeably here. School districts refer to their PAL as entitlement, and almost never do we hear them refer to it as PAL. But we're one place, we're not all the places. So we understand that can be different. So if you hear me call it entitlement and never refer to it as PAL, that's okay. Don't worry that you're doing it wrong. We're just speaking slightly different languages. PAL is what RAs are offered by the state. Okay, so once we get our entitlement amount from USDA in Kentucky, we offer that out on a fair share basis to the school districts to create what is called the PAL, or planned assistance level. Again, I reached out to Jackie down there in Texas with the Department of Agriculture, and she let me know. And let me pull up my notes because I definitely don't want to get this wrong. So Texas, when they are factoring in what the entitlement's going to be offered by district, they take and split their total state entitlement into two pots of money. They have one that is specifically designated for DoD fresh fruit and vegetable purchases and ordering, and then the remainder is what becomes their USDA foods entitlement within the state. They use the state system. I think it's Colliers with an S at the end, I believe. They use that state system to distribute those entitlement funds. They use total lunches served by district to calculate those amounts once they've established what those two pots of money will look like. From my understanding, and given the example again of how our money kind of splits out in Kentucky, you know, we have about $25.5 million that ended up in that USDA foods entitlement pot. Excuse me for using air quotes there, but that's the best I've got. And then we had about $4.5 million that goes to the DoD fresh program up here. So as my understanding is Texas will take those two numbers and allocate out the funds accordingly. DoD in Texas is given in a kind of an opt-in / fair share style system. So it's if a district participates, they are just given an allocation in DoD funds that they have available to them, and that's based on all the meals served involved in those districts that are participating. So it's very similar to what we do in Kentucky, again with their minor variations. So let me get back to my other slide here. Tracking your PAL and your entitlement. Well, what does it mean to you? Number one, knowing what your PAL entitlement, knowing what that is crucial to the efficacy of you utilizing your entitlement or PAL dollars. A very much similar analogy as your bank account. If you don't know how much is in your bank account, you may or may not be leveraging your funds to their maximum potential. Now, what does that look like? That's something that can really only be answered at the district level, at the local level. Those are decisions you have to make and information and questions that you have to assess based on your situation. So I'm not going to sit there and tell you what's the best way to spend all your entitlement. There's not a silver bullet for that, so to speak. Entitlements are they up or down for 2020? The meal count specifically up. Now, as far as the meal rate, those generally trend upward every year, either by a little bit or a lot, depending on circumstances. But they generally trend a little upward, and that's pretty much for increase in cost. So that's something that happens now. The meal counts, obviously, when we go back and look at school year 20, that's why these the waiver that I'd mentioned earlier that USDA has offered for using school year 19 counts in lieu of the school year 20 meal counts because of the obvious situation that we're all dealing with. So that's a little bit of a sticky wicket question there, but overall, in general, we do tend to see meal counts trend upward. So that makes your entitlement trend upward in turn. All obvious exceptions being applied here, it's a little different. So it really makes a year-to-year difference. So should I track my PAL throughout the school year? Absolutely. My recommendation to all of our school districts in Kentucky is to keep an eye on that entitlement balance or that PAL balance, because you want to make sure you're trying to leverage it as best you can, as much as you can, because as I know and as you all know out there, that every penny absolutely counts right now. More now than ever, but it's always counted. So really, you want to pay attention to it and try to use as much as you can. Difference between entitlement, PAL, and bonus. The difference in PAL and entitlement we've kind of talked about. It tends to be a vocabulary and it's fairly interchangeable. Entitlement technically speaks to the state level dollars. PAL speaks to the district level dollars. Again, that can sort of be interchanged. And then bonus, that's becoming less prevalent than it used to be. I say that under normal circumstances, and we are not in normal circumstances, but we have seen more bonus and more other trade mitigation programs that have come into play, which behave like bonus. They are not exactly the same, but they behave similarly from the district's perspective. And that's kind of taken its place at the moment. But what happens in upcoming years, we have generally seen the trend move downward as far as bonus offerings. And those, for any who may or may not be familiar, those are USDA foods made available to states and in turn districts by USDA that do not work against your entitlement or PAL dollars. So it's not going to draw down any money on that entitlement side of the world. And you effectively, and I use the term a little loosely, but effectively free food. It still has value and it's still worth something, but it's not something that you are charged for as a district, either via entitlement or something you have to pay out of pocket. Donated food value versus entitlement. There are spokes on the same wheel. They may not exactly look like the same spokes on the same wheel at sometimes. The donated food value could be a little different from the entitlement that was used to draw it down. Excuse me. So the example I'll give you is you may have a case of USDA foods ground beef that comes in that in WebSCM, it says that specific case of that specific commodity on that specific delivery date may be worth $85 a case. When you go and you look at the value of all of your cases of USDA ground beef that came in direct delivery or brown box, the average value of that may only be $83 a case. Again, I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but so your donated food value and the amount of entitlement it actually draws down could vary some. So again, there's spokes on the same wheel. The general idea is the same, is to make sure we're keeping track and tying that value of the USDA food to the food itself. Now, here's the big question. Who's driving this bus? The short answer is USDA is driving the bus. The bigger question that comes into play is who is the bus and who are the students on the bus? Specifically, USDA, when we say that they're driving the bus, they're directing where the program is heading overall, nationwide, not telling us what to do at the state level or at the local level, but they're saying, hey, here's generally what's going on between agriculture, industry, manufacturers, all the stakeholders that are involved in this program. And they let us know what's going on and they make adjustments to the overall program. Then we as states, we act as the vehicle. We are how this program is transporting, proverbially transporting the program out into the world. And then the RAs, I know at times it feels like you're just along for the ride, and that may be true at some or a lot of points. But at the same time, you all are that important cargo that we're trying to make sure as states that we are doing a good job of getting this program and getting you all what you need. We are the vehicle by which the program is administered to you all. It's our job as states, and I'll give you my perspective of this. It's my job as a state DA or a representative of a state distributing agency to take what USDA is doing, where they think that the program needs to be going, and interpret that and give it to our RAs in a manner and method that is something that they can utilize in a better way on the ground in their programs at the source. So that's kind of how we take things. We take what USDA has, we throw it through a filter that's hopefully more usable for you all as recipient agencies. And again, it's not always something that we don't want you all to feel like you're just being taken along for the ride, but at the same time, we understand that there's a lot of stuff that goes on in front of and behind the curtains that make this program operate, and you may or may not need or be interested in knowing all that stuff. My general approach is if you don't need to know as an RA, I'm not going to tell you explicitly because it may just muddy the water. Now, if you ask me, we're going to be transparent and real honest and let you know what's going on. But that's kind of the role that we take. But at the end of the day, it's all for the benefit of the RAs, and that's really what we're trying to help be a part of, translating what USDA needs us to do on our side to make that work better for you all as recipient agencies. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Carole, and let you move things forward here.
Thank you so much, Garrick. I really appreciate that. And I do want to share that our current ACDA president is Sandy Hopple from the great state of Pennsylvania, and Garrick from Kentucky is the president-elect. So thanks again, Garrick. You know, everything starts with the menu, and we're going to review just a couple of basics here. The PAL dollars that Garrick was talking about, that a recipient agency or an RA, which is the PAL dollars that you have, they can be spent in one of three ways: the DoD produce program, direct delivery or brown box, and then processing. One of our state agency colleagues often says that another option is for a recipient agency to spend nothing and just give their entitlement dollars away. You see, the state agencies are tasked with spending entitlement, and if one RA in their state does not spend their dollars, I'm sure certainly another RA will. How do you know what to spend your PAL or planned assistance dollars on? And it starts with that foods available list. It's published annually to show which foods may be offered to state distributing agencies and school districts during the upcoming school year. You have to keep in mind which items will actually be ordered depends on the state distributing agency and their decisions. There's 191 items on the school year 2021 foods available list, and they're grouped in different categories. There's 40 fruits, 20 poultry, 18 cheese, 13 beef. I mean, there's 191 items on this list that PAL dollars can be spent on. I mentioned direct delivery on the previous slide, and they're all on this foods available list. Those direct delivery or brown box items are ingredients to finished end products, which can be used in preparing school meals. The items highlighted in yellow, those are bulk for further processing. These are codes that you would divert to a further processor, and there's more than 30 different raw materials that are available for diversion. These are items that are highlighted in yellow, as I said, and you should notice the date at the top. The foods available list comes out around the beginning of December every year. Let's review what we're talking about. The RA stakeholders have PAL dollars to spend, they create their menus and evaluate the costs, and then they order their USDA foods and receive them. That's a very simple graphic for a complicated process. Many processors have commodity calculators. They may call them a little bit something different, but the purpose of a commodity calculator is to determine how many raw pounds of that USDA foods code you would need to send to that processor. So in this example, I have 3 end items that the processor manufactures: cheese sauce, beef patties, and turkey patties. The first set of highlighted numbers are an example of what you might be requested to enter into a commodity calculator. In other words, you might be asked to enter how many servings do you expect to serve for this item for an entire school year. And once that data is filled in, the calculator would do all the work for you. So in this example, if you wanted to serve a cheddar cheese sauce, it's telling you the USDA foods code, you put in the number of servings that you hope to serve for the year. It's looking at the donated foods required for that case, and then it multiplies it all out and says, well, for this one item, you would need to divert 1,500 pounds of cheese. That's what a commodity calculator does. The words value pass-through systems refers to the manner in which the recipient agency receives the full value of their entitlement dollars. There's 5 different allowable values. Both the state agency and the processor need to check off which method is allowable and used on that processor's state processing agreement. So you have rebates and refunds, direct discount, net off invoice, fee for service, and then an other approved method. You can see at the very top the word menu. It all starts with your menu. And notice at the end of the flow, I mentioned the word adjust. If you've been in this business for one day, you realize that things never seem to go completely as planned. And those words pretty much capture this entire COVID experience. Please keep in mind that as you make adjustments, communication is really critical, not only with your staff, but with the processors, with the brokers, the distributor, the co-op leaders, etc. We all must work together to succeed. So that was a very quick processing 101. And now, Roger, it is your time. So I'd like to introduce and thank again for his time and expertise, Roger Szemraj with ACDA's legal counsel to provide a legislative update. Roger?
Thank you, Carole. I do appreciate all of your attendance today, and thank you for including us as part of your program. We know this has been a very difficult and a very trying year for everyone. It is not the normal way things operate, and as a result, we've had to see different types of programs created and modified in order to continue operations. That all starts with legislation. You may remember that earlier this year, the Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That was the key bill for providing USDA with additional waiver authority that has allowed so many of the waivers that have gone into operation this year, whether we're talking about area-wide eligibility, whether we're talking about commodity entitlement dollars, whether we're talking about menu waivers and a host of other items. It all came about as a result of provisions provided in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We talked about waivers, and we know that you've recently gotten waivers extending the operations of these programs through the end of December. The Secretary of Agriculture under the Act had authority through, believe it or not, actually today, September 30th, to utilize those waiver authorities. And in the announcement they made, they provided some of the waivers only through the end of this calendar year. So we need to have an extension of that waiver authority in order for these. Enough, the House of Representatives last resolution, which will provide funding for the federal government through December 11th. Part of that bill included an extension of the waiver authorities that were granted in the Families First Act. And believe it or not, that bill is actually being voted on by the United States Senate this afternoon. So we expect that the Secretary will soon have the authority to extend those waivers through the balance of the school year. In fact, he will have waiver authority through September 30th of 2021. So we could see other waivers for summer food service and other items as needed as we get into the next year. Now, some of you may remember hearing about the HEROES Act that was passed by the House back in May. The HEROES Act provided additional resources for schools to be made whole for their revenue losses for meals that school year. The HEROES Act was passed by the House in May. It has not been passed by the Senate as of yet. And even though we've heard all the various news reports of the Senate taking up different types of COVID relief bills, those COVID relief bills being brought forth in the Senate have not provided any additional authorities for school meal programs. Interestingly enough, again, we just had in the House of Representatives a modified version of the HEROES Act introduced yesterday, and it's going to be debated by the full House of Representatives today. So today is a crucial day on a number of different bills. We're also hearing that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin are continuing to negotiate what will be acceptable to the administration as further legislation moves along. We may have some announcements on that today. We may not have that for another couple of days, but we expect the House to take up that particular bill today. So with that legislation in place, we move on to our next slide. Waivers, waivers, waivers. As we've already talked about, there are a number of waiver authorities in place. Some of them are national waivers. Some of them are waivers that can be requested by states, and it is up to the states to make that request. FNS has granted the waivers that states have asked for, but again, if a waiver authority is available, it's very important for the state to exercise the waiver authority when available, or to request the waiver authority when they have to put forth that type of request. We will all hear different stories of different practices in different states as to what they're doing with their waiver authorities. And that's really allowed from the standpoint that different situations in different states merit different types of responses. But if you're hearing some other state is granting some type of waiver or using waiver authority in a way that your state is not, you can always ask your state agency, why? Why can't we do the same thing? We know the waiver authority is there. We believe we have a need. And it's up to you as a local operator to provide the best case information to your state authority to help them justify the waiver request. But we've been through legislation. We've been through utilizing the waivers. What is going to be the next step going forward? And the next step is our next slide. Child nutrition reauthorization. You may remember that the last time the Congress actually completed child nutrition reauthorization was in 2010, Hunger-Free Kids Act. There was other legislation that was introduced and considered in the House and also some in the Senate in 2015, but that legislation was never completed. So again, we're sitting on a 10-year-old child nutrition reauthorization bill. It is very likely that the Congress will consider child nutrition reauthorization within the next 2 years, certainly starting during 2021. To be key, learn from our experience with the response to the pandemic situation. What programs are good? What programs didn't work? What happened with meal counts? What type of waiver authorities do we need to have in order to make sure that schools have flexibility to operate these programs? So it's very, very important that we all receive information from each and every state and from the recipient agencies as to what worked and what didn't work. We also want to make sure that you all understand that there may be those who take a look at what happened in the last year or during this past year to see, well, should we change the way we operate the school nutrition programs overall? So sometimes information can be used to support a program. Other times information can be used to provide a challenge to a program. We need to be prepared for that activity. So as we move forward with child nutrition reauthorization, I again urge you to think about the way your program has operated, what has worked for you, what has not worked for you, what type of authorities would you like to see continue in the future, so that you can provide the best information to your state agencies, what you can provide to your associations like the American Commodity Distribution Association, and very importantly, what you can provide to your congressmen and senators. Believe it or not, virtually half of the House will have never been in office having voted on a child nutrition reauthorization bill the next time this legislation comes up. Close to a third of the Senate will have not been in office in the Senate voting on a child nutrition bill since the last time a child nutrition bill has come up for final passage. So you're going to have a lot of elected officials who think they know the programs, but do not necessarily know the programs. So it's important for you to take advantage of educating your own congressmen, your own senators to what you do, what your needs are, what your challenges are, and what your successes are. And please know, ACDA is prepared and very happy to work with you in this regard. Carole, thanks very much. Back to you.
Well, Roger, thank you so much. You've shared so much information so quickly. it's all a little overwhelming, I must say. But Carrie, that brings us to a point in our presentation that we would like to first look to the chat box to see if there are any questions. And I see you unmuted yourself. Do we have anything to respond to?
You know, not at this point. I'm not seeing any questions come through. I thought it was very clear and informative, and certainly what Roger just highlighted on certainly gives us a lot to think about. And I hope many reach out to their Congress person, because 10 years is a long time. You know, we need some change, I think.
So since there are no questions in the chat box, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a few questions of my own.
Okay, and if you want to stop the screen share, then we can see you.
Okay. All right, so Roger, let's go over again some of the information you shared, because we do have about 18 or 15 minutes left for this session. And I just want to make sure I understood things very clearly. You started out talking about the two important acts that have happened since the beginning of this year. What is the best way for an average American to keep up on what is happening in Congress?
Well, certainly communication with your state agency to find out what the state agency can tell you. Certainly information put out by the Food and Nutrition Service with the information they put out on the waiver authorities. If you look at the FNS homepage, you will see links to the waiver information for child nutrition and programs. And by all means, I think you should take a look at what's going on with your various associations to which you belong, because they're all working to provide information to their membership. I also encourage people to get familiar using congressional committee websites. If you go to agriculture.senate.gov, you will find the Senate Agriculture Committee page, and you can scroll through there to find information about hearings they've held, statements made by both the majority and the minority, and information about the legislation they've considered that includes summaries. On the House side, we've got kind of a bifurcated situation. We have two committees that are dealing with these issues. On the one hand, you do have the House Agriculture Committee, and that is agriculture.house.gov. And that committee is dealing with the SNAP program, with TFAP, with Commodities Supplemental Food Program, with a lot of the commodity purchasing authority that the child nutrition programs, lunch, breakfast, special meal, child and adult care feeding program, the WIC program, are all handled by a different committee in the House. They're handled by the Education and Labor Committee. Their website is edlabor, edlabor.house.gov. And again, you can get, as I said, for the other committees, information about their hearings, description of the legislation, and other matters that may be of interest to you. So simply looking at those from time to time will help keep yourself informed.
Okay, so having listened to what you just said, and Roger, you're very, yes.
Oh, I'm going to stop you right there just for a quick minute. You can come back. I'll turn my video off. I've got one question that came through, and this is probably a question for Roger. So the question is, will ACDA take the lead with its membership on the reauthorization efforts?
Well, ACDA certainly will be a leading component with its members on those items involving child nutrition that are a particular focus for ACDA. You know, we're involved with the school meal programs generally, but we're focusing for the most part on the commodity aspects of those programs. So that will be where our focus will be. ACDA will also join with other advocacy groups in support of child nutrition programs. You know, we work with FRAC, we work with Feeding America, we work with Bread for the World, we work with the School Nutrition Association, we work with the Urban School Food Alliance. So there are a wide variety of groups that will be involved in working on child nutrition reauthorization.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Roger, what did we sign on? We ACDA signed on to what, like 900,000 letters in the last couple of months? We signed on to several letters as an organization with a lot of those partners that Roger's talking about. So
you're right, Garrick. You're right, Garrick. There have been a number of letters that have gone to the Hill, gone to Secretary Perdue, urging waiver authorities and like. In fact, the most recent one where that act is signed on to, that was urging extension of the area-wide eligibility waiver throughout the full school year, was signed by more than 1,400 organizations, national and state. So there's a large group of organizations that's willing to work and speak up. We just want you to know that there's a way for you to have a voice and make sure that your voice is heard.
Absolutely. And I do have another question, so I don't mean to cut you off there, Carole. I have a question on to please explain how to become an ACTA member and then take advantage of the benefits as an ACTA member.
Garrick, do you want to answer that, or would you like me to take it?
I certainly can if you want me to. The easiest, quickest way would be to visit www.commodityfoods.org. Spelled it out like it sounds, and you can check in there. There are plenty of resources, not only for members, but information on how to become a member of ACTA. But it's right there on the web, commodityfoods.org. You can shoot me an email if you're interested. You could probably reach out to Lena Wilson, just about anybody that you know that's working either almost all processors that are doing commodity processing, state agencies, other fellow counterpart RAs that may want to participate. All those folks are most likely members of ACTA, and if you're not having luck with the website, we'll get you directed to somebody who can help you out for sure, because we would love to have you, and we do feel it's beneficial for recipient agencies, and we understand. Part of it is we have a lot of organizations to be a part of as RAs, but at the same time, when I was talking about, efficiently and maximizing that usage of your USDA foods, there's a lot of stuff we cover at ACTA that SNA, that's not their primary role. So that's our primary role, and that's why we exist. So we want to make sure that we're there as a resource for RAs, and that's something we've been focusing on the last few years. So absolutely reach out or check our website, again, commodityfoods.org.
So, Garrick, you've talked about the advocacy efforts, the education. I think as far as an industry member is concerned, it's the networking. It's the opportunity to come together with those who are working with USDA foods to share not only ideas, concerns, whatever, but it's that network of stakeholders that is just so beneficial. So.
Yep, I agree.
So, Carrie, do we have a next question?
Well, I'm having to watch two panels. I don't see any new questions yet. So I think that is it for now, unless someone has another question. Nice.
I wanted, do we have a minute? I can.
Oh, absolutely. You got 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, that's right. I did want to take a second. It's something I didn't really beat this drum when I was talking earlier with the slides. But I do want to make sure and take a moment, of course, with the situation that the pandemic situation everybody's dealing with right now. This is something that I've personally learned, is that communication has become so much more important than it ever has. But even prior to that, that's something I want to encourage those of you who are recipient agencies. If you feel like you can improve, if you have an area you can improve your communication with your state agency contacts, please do that at every opportunity you've got. I encourage you all to do that. And that's something that we in Kentucky, you've seen stereotypical Kentuckians on TV, and we're pretty well like, hey, come on over, how's your mom and them, and all that stuff. But look, I encourage all of our RAs to reach out to us. The sooner that you reach out as an RA to the state agency, if there's an issue, the sooner we can help, and the more options we probably have. So I encourage you guys as best you can to take advantage and encourage and grow those relationships and communications with your state agency, because there's so much that they can provide in a normal situation. And then, of course, right now it's even more important. So please, by all means, do that. The communication is so big right now.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely spot on, Garrick. And I will say that as a national processor, you know, I'm with JTM for my full-time job, but as a national processor, these districts in the state of Texas are very blessed because they have an outstanding set of resources in TDA. TDA is awesome. And of course, under the leadership of Lena and her staff, they're just on it. So I think your comments about communication, they're right on. And yeah, the Texas, what they've done with their Texas TDA task force, which Lena started, I think, you know, at the end of March, to bring stakeholders together to talk about inventory and the impact of slow moving inventory and whatnot. They're honored at TDA, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you for that, Carole. I do have another question that has come in. So here's the question. What is ACDA doing to help the RAs maximize the usage of their USDA foods in their menus and avoid excess inventory issues?
All right, I'll go first. That's a great question. And, you know, since COVID started in mid-March, ACDA, I don't know in total how many educational sessions that we have had, but we have had a series of webinars. And many of those webinars have been focused on exactly that very issue. You know, how can we assist the RA in trying to utilize those USDA foods? So here again, in visiting our website, you should be able to see recordings or whatnot of some of those sessions. That's the very first thing that comes to mind. And I hate to say it like that, but the fact that it was a webinar or whatever, but that is the world that we're living in right now. The ACDA conference that we had planned last April was canceled. And of course, that's the first time we've had one of our conferences canceled. So we were not able to meet in person. But I feel like we did respond as an organization. And of course, we're still learning. And we have a virtual conference coming up in October on the 20th and 21st, just a few short weeks away now. And during our virtual conference, with Garrick, you could probably speak to more than I could, it is focusing on this very topic of how can we get the USDA foods moving again. So those are my first thoughts. Garrick?
Yeah, I'll mirror those. There are a lot of resources on the ACDA website for members. I know this is, well, I'm not a member, but, you know, of course, it's sort of one of those. But there is a members only section that has a lot of those resources available that we have done in the past. Likewise, as Carole mentioned, we do have our virtual conference that's, you know, it's taking the place of our April in-person conference. It was slated to be in Seattle in April, at the end of April. So as you can do the calendar math, and it wasn't going to be an okay thing for us to continue with that. But it's now in October on the 20th and 21st. So a couple of weeks. You can still register to be a part of that. That's still available and still open again, commodityfoods.org. We'll take you to our webpage, and there'll be information about our virtual conference. If you want to participate in that, I highly recommend it, because the pivot, it was in fact, here's our conference. We weren't really necessarily planning anything at all about the pandemic, because it didn't exist when we started planning the conference. And then as we pivoted, you know, we did make some adjustments, and those will be topics that come in, and those are topics that just naturally found their way into the discussion, whether we wanted them or not. So that information is there. Not to mention, as far as what ACDA specifically is doing for inventory management, I tell you, the biggest thing for me as a state distributing agency that's helped me help our state is the conversation that I'm able to have I guess on behalf of our RAs to a degree. I don't want to speak for them, but what I'm learning from what's going on in the rest of the country has become invaluable information. I'm talking to folks around the country. I mean, we just talked to some folks in Texas just here in the last 24, 48 hours, specifically about your entitlement dollars, but particularly the conversations that go back and forth. Carole and I, as a matter of fact, with inventory management, she and I just exchanged emails this morning on something she was waiting on me to answer a couple of days anyway. But, we're constantly having this conversation as state DA, manufacturers, and I'm reaching out to recipient agencies too. Hey, look, here's a situation we've got. We've got to cancel some trucks of this because we've got too much coming in and we're not using enough as a state. It's not anybody's fault. We understand that it's going to create an issue as far as unspent entitlement dollars by having to cancel this load or that load. But the point is we're communicating saying, hey, this is what we're having to do. We're having to make pivots. This is not an easy situation for us. It's not an easy situation for you, but we're going to get through it. But it's encouraging me to know that out there in the universe, we are not alone. Kentucky is not the only state dealing with this situation. And we're able to pass that information on to our RAs and be a support for them. And say, look, this is not something that's a problem for us as a state, it's not a problem for you as a district. It's just a situation we have to deal with. So there's that part of the advocacy that's given me specifically as a state DA an insight that helps me facilitate more for our recipient agencies and our school districts and be more of a support and help as opposed to that traditional, pillar of state government that you got to deal with. We want you coming to us so that we can, work together. We're not looking for any of that, traditional. A lot of folks say, the state's coming, we don't want that. We want people talking, we want the dialogue open, and we want the conversation to be really nice and helpful.
Mm-hmm. The bottom line, the way I see it, is that you have USDA, who has the authority to oversee these USDA foods programs. And with that comes a whole host of regulations and policies. And none of that is easily changed. But ACDA provides, really, it's where reality meets all those policies and regulations. And it's through this association, the support group, the support that we're able to give one another, that I think is so incredibly valuable. So
we also have, just for reference, we also have a monthly call with USDA directly to talk about issues and situations that are going on. So if, utilizing an inventory management is an issue, it's a topic that gets brought up plenty. We have those communication channels open with everywhere that we can have them open.
Well, Garrick, as you begin your presidency in the next school year, I hope you're keeping a diary of all these things that you're involved in. Carrie, are there any other questions?
I do not see any more questions, but that was a great presentation. Just super. Yeah, nothing else coming in. I just want to thank the three of you for giving us your time, your expertise, sharing the knowledge with those that have attended this session. I'm sure they're walking away with a brain full of information and ideas of what are their next steps, moving forward during this time. But, I hear Garrick talk about, and all of you, the sadness of having to cancel the conference. And while we are all really great at the face-to-face, this situation has forced us to become, hopefully, really great at the virtual. And there is some good coming out of it, oddly enough, in that who knows what in the next year, New Orleans is going to bring. It might be a really great blended model that gives access to more people to attend the ACDA conferences that maybe every year want to, but don't get that opportunity and miss out on all the great sessions at that conference. So I know it's my favorite conference of the year. So anyway, thank you all for your time and presenting in our expo. It's been great hearing from each of you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And visit the exhibitor booths if you haven't done so. They're starting now, and I'm crossing my fingers we don't have technical problems like yesterday. And then don't forget to come back to the agenda, because at 4 o'clock TDA will be giving their stakeholders update session. So hope to see all of you guys there as well.
Okay.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.